It starts with one small act. A veteran single dad sees a woman with a broken car and an empty stomach. He fixes the engine. He buys the groceries. He asks for nothing. But then she whispers the truth. She's not poor at all. She's a hidden billionaire, running from a world that only loves her money. Overnight, smiles turn to stares, whispers turn to rumors. His shop loses trust. Her secret draws users. Even his own son points a finger. She's playing you. Then an anonymous gift sparks a dream for wounded soldiers. But who's behind it? And what will it cost? When kindness meets power, and the whole town takes sides, will a father protect his heart, or fight for the truth that could save them both? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jack Carter pushed his cart down the grocery store aisle, carefully checking prices and comparing them to his short shopping list. His weathered hands gripped the cart handle, knuckles showing years of mechanical work. At 58, he had his routine down to a science. Simple meals. Basic necessities. Nothing fancy. Living on a veteran's pension and part-time mechanic work meant watching every dollar. He reached for a loaf of wheat bread, the store brand on sale this week. A lifetime of military service had taught him to be practical, and old habits died hard. As he turned his cart toward the checkout, movement outside the store's large front windows caught his eye. A young woman was standing beside an old sedan, her shoulders slumped in defeat as she stared at the hood of her car. Jack watched as she tried the ignition again, the engine making that distinctive clicking sound that spoke of either a dead battery or something worse. She dropped her head into her hands for a moment, and something about her vulnerability stirred his heart. He'd seen that look before, on the faces of young soldiers far from home, on his own children when times got tough. After paying for his modest groceries, Jack made his way to the parking lot. Up close, he could see the woman's clothes were well worn. A faded blue sweater with threads pulling at the edges, jeans that had seen better days. She was trying to look composed, but her eyes held that haunted look of someone who'd been dealt too many hard blows lately. "Having trouble with your car, miss?" Jack's voice was gentle, the kind that had calmed nervous recruits and comforted his children after nightmares. She startled slightly, turning to face him. "Oh, yes, it just won't start. I'm sure it's fine, though." "I'll figure something out." Her voice wavered slightly, despite her attempt at confidence. "Name's Jack Carter. I do some mechanic work on the side. Mind if I take a look?" "I'm Emily," she replied softly. "But please, don't trouble yourself. I've already called." She trailed off, the lie evident in her hesitation. Jack noticed her empty shopping cart nearby. "Were you planning to get some groceries?" he asked, keeping his tone casual. Emily's cheeks flushed. "I was, but maybe another time would be better." Jack recognized the look, pride wrestling with necessity. He'd seen it in the mirror enough times after Sarah passed, when neighbors brought casseroles and offered help. "Tell you what," he said. "Why don't you grab what you need while I take a preliminary look at your car? No sense in wasting the trip." He smiled warmly, trying to ease her discomfort. "I really couldn't," Emily began, but Jack was already pulling her cart from the corral. "I insist. Consider it my good deed for the day. Makes me feel useful." He gave her a conspiratorial wink, the kind that had always worked on his daughter when she was being stubborn. Emily's resistance crumbled under his kind persistence. Together they walked back into the store, Jack careful to give her space as she hesitantly selected basic items: bread, peanut butter, some fruit. He noticed her checking prices carefully, putting back anything that seemed too expensive. Without drawing attention to it, Jack added a few extra items to the cart: a carton of eggs, milk, some vegetables. When they reached the checkout, he smoothly stepped in front of her before she could protest, pulling out his worn leather wallet. "Mr. Carter, please, I can't let you—" Emily's voice was thick with emotion. "Jack," he corrected gently. "And yes, you can. I've been where you are, believe me. Sometimes we all need a helping hand." The cashier rang up the groceries while Emily stood beside him, her hands twisting together. Jack could see tears threatening in her eyes, but she blinked them back, maintaining her dignity. Outside, the early evening air had cooled considerably. Jack pushed the cart toward Emily's sedan, taking note of its worn appearance, the faded paint, the small rust spots around the wheel wells. It was the kind of car that had stories to tell, none of them easy ones. "I'll come back tomorrow morning with my tools," he said, helping her load the groceries into the trunk. "Should be able to figure out what's wrong then. For now, let me give you a jump start. Might at least get you home." "I don't know how to thank you," Emily said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "This kindness, it's more than I deserve." Jack shook his head, remembering countless times when others had helped him. "Kindness isn't about deserving, miss. It's about being human. We all struggle sometimes." He looked at her threadbare sweater as a cool breeze swept through the parking lot. "You got someone to call for a ride? In case the jump doesn't work?" "Yes," Emily nodded quickly, though Jack noticed she didn't reach for a phone. "I'll be fine, really. Well, I'll still come by tomorrow to check that engine properly," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "What time works for you? Maybe around 9?" Emily suggested hesitantly. "If that's not too early." "9 it is," Jack agreed, noting how she seemed to stand a little straighter, as if his simple offer of help had lightened some invisible burden. "Now, let me get those jumper cables for my truck, and we'll see about getting you on your way." The evening sun cast long shadows across Jack Carter's modest driveway as he wiped his hands on an old red rag. He'd spent the last hour fixing Emily's sedan, just a loose battery connection and some minor adjustments. The sweet aroma of Mary's cooking wafted through the screened windows of their small ranch-style home. "All set," Jack said, closing the hood with a gentle thump. "Should start right up now." Emily stood nearby, her delicate hands clasped together. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Carter." "Jack," he corrected with a kind smile. "And you can thank me by joining us for supper. Mary always makes too much anyway." Inside, Mary was pulling a steaming casserole from the oven, the cheese on top, perfectly golden brown. The kitchen was small but tidy, with worn but clean countertops and faded curtains that Mary had sewn herself. A vase of fresh wildflowers brightened the center of the round oak table. "Hope you like chicken and rice casserole," Mary said warmly, setting the dish on a protective pad. Her dark hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes sparkled with the same kindness as her father's. "It smells wonderful," Emily said, taking the seat Jack pulled out for her. She waited until everyone was seated before carefully unfolding her napkin onto her lap. Mary served generous portions onto their mismatched plates, steam rising in delicate swirls. "Dad mentioned you're new in town?" Emily nodded, taking a small bite. "This is delicious," she said softly. "And yes, I'm just passing through, actually." "No fixed destination?" Jack asked, breaking apart a piece of cornbread. "Not exactly." Emily's eyes dropped to her plate. "Sometimes the best path is the one that finds you." Mary watched their guest with quiet curiosity, noting how Emily held her fork with perfect form, how she took small, measured bites. There was something about her manners that seemed almost practiced. "Dad, why don't you tell Emily about your time in the service?" Mary suggested, passing the salt shaker. "He has some amazing stories." Jack shook his head modestly. "Oh, nobody wants to hear those old tales." "I'd love to," Emily said earnestly, her full attention turning to Jack. There was something in her expression, a genuine interest that made Jack's usual reluctance fade. "Well," he began, settling back in his chair, "there was this one time in Kuwait." His voice took on a gentle storytelling rhythm as he shared memories of brotherhood and service, carefully choosing lighter moments that wouldn't darken the dinner table. Emily listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed she was truly engaged. Her eyes never wandered, and she seemed to hang on every word. When Jack mentioned the veterans he still kept in touch with, her expression softened with empathy. "It's the bonds you form," Jack explained, absently running his thumb along the edge of his water glass. "Nothing quite like it. These days I try to help out where I can. There's a shelter downtown where some of the vets gather." "That's wonderful," Emily said softly. "The world needs more people who care like that." Mary noticed how her father's shoulders relaxed as he talked, how the usual tension he carried seemed to ease in Emily's presence. It had been a long time since she'd seen him this comfortable with someone new. The conversation flowed easily through dinner, though Emily skillfully deflected most questions about herself. When Mary asked about her family, Emily simply smiled and said, "It's complicated," before turning the conversation back to Jack's stories. After the plates were cleared and the leftovers carefully wrapped, Emily insisted on helping with the dishes despite their protests. She stood at the sink beside Mary, drying each plate with careful attention. "You know," Mary said quietly, "Dad doesn't usually open up like that to strangers. He must sense something special in you." Emily's cheeks flushed slightly as she placed a glass in the cupboard. "He's a remarkable man. You both are so kind, taking in a stranger like this." "Sometimes the best family is the one you choose," Mary replied, echoing one of her father's favorite sayings. The kitchen clock showed 8:30 when Emily finally gathered her things to leave. Jack walked her to her car, the evening air cool and sweet, with the scent of nearby flowering trees. "Thank you again for fixing my car," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And for dinner. And for—" She paused, emotion catching in her throat. "I'll never forget your kindness." "Anyone would have done the same," Jack said, characteristically humble. Emily shook her head, a sad smile playing at her lips. "No, they wouldn't. That's what makes it so special." She slipped into her car, and Jack watched until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Inside, Mary was wrapping the last of the cornbread in foil. "She's different," Mary said thoughtfully. "Did you notice how she held her silverware? Like she was at a fancy restaurant instead of our little kitchen." Jack nodded slowly. "Funny thing about people, sometimes there's more to their story than they're ready to tell." The sound of crickets filtered through the screen door, a peaceful evening chorus that seemed to underscore the lingering warmth of shared meals and gentle conversation. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Main Street as Jack's weathered pickup truck rumbled towards St. Matthew's Church. Emily sat quietly in the passenger seat, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The old truck's worn leather seat squeaked with every bump in the road. "The food pantry's been running for 20 years now," Jack explained, his calm voice carrying over the engine's steady purr. "Pastor William started it when the mill closed down. Never stopped since." Emily nodded, taking in the simple beauty of their small town. It's wonderful how communities come together to help each other. They pulled into the church parking lot where several volunteers were already unloading boxes from a delivery truck. The white clapboard church stood tall against the morning sky, its steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing the way. "Jack! Right on time," Pastor Williams called out, his silver hair catching the sunlight. He was a tall man with kind eyes and well-worn laugh lines. "And you've brought help." "This is Emily," Jack introduced her. "She'd like to volunteer." The pastor's warm smile widened. "We can always use more helping hands." "Welcome, Emily." Inside the church basement, folding tables formed long lines where various food items were arranged. The concrete floors were clean but showed years of wear, and fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Cardboard boxes filled with canned goods, fresh produce, and bread lined the walls. "Emily, would you mind helping Mrs. Henderson sort the vegetables?" Jack asked, pointing to an elderly volunteer wearing a floral apron. "Of course," Emily replied, rolling up her sleeves. As the morning progressed, people began arriving. Families with young children, elderly couples, and single parents. Emily worked quietly but efficiently, her movements graceful despite the humble task. She sorted green beans and potatoes with the same care she might have shown handling fine china. Jack noticed how she treated each person with genuine respect, looking them in the eye and offering gentle smiles. There was no condescension in her manner, no hint of superiority. She seemed to truly understand the dignity every person deserved. Midway through the morning, a young mother came in, her eyes red from crying. She carried a sleeping toddler on her hip while trying to manage 2 other children who clung to her legs. Emily immediately stepped forward to help. "Let me hold the baby while you fill your basket," she offered softly. The mother hesitated, then carefully transferred her sleeping child to Emily's arms. As she gathered food items, Emily spoke quietly with her, listening intently to her story of job loss and mounting bills. "Would you mind if we prayed together?" Emily asked when the mother had finished collecting her groceries. The woman nodded, tears welling up again. Emily shifted the sleeping child gently and took the mother's hand. Her prayer was simple but heartfelt, asking for strength, guidance, and provision. Several nearby volunteers, including Jack, bowed their heads in solidarity. Pastor Williams observed from across the room, noting Emily's natural grace and the way she carried herself. Despite her modest clothes, there was something in her bearing that spoke of refinement. He caught Jack's eye and raised an eyebrow questioningly, but Jack just shrugged, returning to his work of breaking down empty boxes. As the morning wore on, Emily moved between tasks effortlessly, bagging bread, carrying boxes to cars, and offering kind words to everyone she encountered. The other volunteers welcomed her warm presence, and even Mrs. Henderson, known for being particular about her vegetable sorting, nodded in approval. "You've got a good heart," Jack told her during a quiet moment as they restocked the bread table together. Emily's cheeks flushed slightly. "I just believe we're all deserving of kindness, Mr. Carter." "Jack," he corrected gently. "Mr. Carter was my father." By early afternoon, the flow of people had slowed to a trickle. The remaining volunteers worked together to clean up, wiping down tables and sweeping floors. Emily insisted on staying until every last task was complete. "I can drive you home now," Jack offered as they finished, noting how tired she looked despite her unwavering smile. They said their goodbyes to Pastor Williams and the remaining volunteers. The pastor watched them leave, a thoughtful expression on his face as he observed Jack holding the door open for Emily with old-fashioned courtesy. The truck rumbled through town again, this time heading toward the outskirts, where small apartment buildings lined quiet streets. Emily directed Jack to a modest two-story complex painted pale yellow, its small balconies adorned with hanging plants. "This is me," she said as they pulled up. "Thank you for everything, Jack. Today meant a lot. We're at the pantry every Thursday if you'd like to come again," he offered, trying to keep his tone casual. Emily smiled warmly. "I'd like that very much." Jack watched as she walked to her apartment, her steps measured and graceful despite her obvious fatigue. She turned and waved before disappearing inside, leaving Jack to wonder about the mysteries that seemed to surround her like a gentle mist. The apartment complex was simple but well-maintained, with window boxes full of geraniums adding cheerful splashes of color. It wasn't where Jack would have expected someone with Emily's refined manners to live, but somehow it suited her understated presence in their small town. The autumn breeze rustled through the maple trees in Miller Park, scattering crimson and gold leaves across the worn walking path. Jack and Emily strolled side by side, their footsteps crunching softly on the fallen leaves. After a week of shared meals and quiet conversations at church activities, they had fallen into an easy rhythm together. Jack's weathered hands were tucked into the pockets of his old denim jacket, his silver hair catching the late afternoon light. Emily walked beside him in her simple second-hand sweater and jeans, her face peaceful as she watched a pair of squirrels chase each other up a nearby oak tree. "You know," Jack said softly, breaking their comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about your situation." He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "There are some good job openings at the hardware store in town. Owner's a friend of mine, Tom Baker. He's always looking for reliable help." Emily slowed her steps, her expression hard to read. Jack continued gently, "And Mary mentioned the diner needs a new waitress. The tips aren't much, but it's steady work." He paused at a wooden bench overlooking the duck pond. I want you to find some stability again. This community, it looks after its own." They sat down together, watching the ripples spread across the water as a mother duck guided her ducklings toward shore. Emily's fingers twisted in her lap, and Jack noticed her eyes growing misty. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you." She took a shaky breath, looking down at her clasped hands. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Jack turned toward her, concern etching his features. "What is it?" "I'm not," Emily's voice caught. She blinked rapidly, a tear sliding down her cheek. "I'm not poor at all." Her words came out in a rush now. "My name is Emily Whitmore, the Whitmore Industries heiress." Jack's weathered face froze in confusion. "Whitmore Industries? The global corporation?" Emily nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "My father built the company from nothing. When he died last year, I inherited everything." She looked at him pleadingly. "I've been living this way because I needed to know if genuine kindness still existed in the world, without wealth attached to it." Jack sat back heavily against the bench, his mind struggling to process her words. The Emily he knew, the quiet woman who prayed with struggling families at the food pantry, who helped Mary wash dishes after dinner, who listened to his old war stories with such genuine interest. She was worth billions? All those times His voice trailed off as he remembered buying her groceries, fixing her car, sharing their simple meals. "You must have thought I was foolish." "No." Emily reached for his hand impulsively. "No, Jack. Your kindness meant everything because it was real. You helped me without knowing who I was or what I had. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Jack stared at their joined hands, his calloused fingers against her smooth ones. He thought about his modest pension, his part-time mechanic work, his small house with its creaking floors and faded wallpaper. It all seemed impossibly small now. "Why tell me this now?" he asked quietly. Emily's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Because you've shown me what true generosity looks like. It's not about money. It's about seeing someone's heart." She squeezed his hand. "And I couldn't bear to keep hiding the truth from you any longer." They sat in silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. A cool breeze stirred the leaves around their feet. Finally, Jack stood up, his movements slow and uncertain. "I should get you home," he said, his voice rough. The drive back to Emily's apartment was silent. Jack's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as his mind raced with images. Emily in designer clothes instead of second-hand sweaters. Emily in mansion ballrooms instead of his humble kitchen. Emily's name in newspaper headlines about billion-dollar mergers. He pulled up outside her small rental building, but neither of them moved to get out. The truck's engine ticked as it cooled in the gathering dusk. "Jack?" Emily's voice was small in the darkness. "Please say something." He stared straight ahead through the windshield. "I need some time to think," he managed. This is a lot to take in." Emily nodded, gathering her purse. "I understand." She opened the passenger door, then paused. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." The door closed softly behind her. Jack watched her walk to her building, disappearing inside. He sat there for a long time, his hand still gripping the steering wheel as night settled over the quiet street. The woman he'd thought he knew, the gentle soul who needed his help, was actually one of the wealthiest people in the country. His mind couldn't reconcile the two images. Finally, he put the truck in gear and drove home through the darkened streets, feeling more lost than he had since losing his wife. The revelation echoed in his head with each turn of the wheels. Emily Whitmore, the heiress, living in disguise, finding worth in his simple acts of kindness. He pulled into his driveway and killed the engine, but didn't get out. The house was dark. Mary was working the late shift at the hospital. Sitting alone in his old truck, Jack let out a long, shaky breath as the full weight of Emily's revelation settled over him like a heavy blanket. Everything he thought he knew had shifted, leaving him unsteady and unsure of what came next. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Jack's modest kitchen, casting warm squares of light across the worn linoleum floor. Emily sat at the small oak table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Jack had invited her over early, hoping to better understand the revelation from yesterday's walk. She looked different to him now, though nothing about her appearance had changed. The same gentle eyes, the simple clothes, the quiet grace, but knowing her true identity made him see everything in a new light. Even the way she held his cheap department store mug seemed more refined than he'd first noticed. "I left the city 3 months ago," Emily began, her voice soft but steady. "I couldn't take it anymore. The constant parties, the fake smiles, the endless parade of people wanting something from me." She took a small sip of coffee, gathering her thoughts. "Every man who asked me to dinner had already calculated how much my family was worth. Every woman who wanted to be my friend had an agenda or a business proposal." Jack nodded slowly, his own coffee untouched. The morning light caught the silver in his hair as he listened intently. "The final straw was a charity gala," she continued, her fingers tightening around the mug. "I overheard my date, a successful businessman everyone thought was perfect for me, bragging to his friends about how he'd landed the Whitmore fortune. He hadn't even mentioned my name, just the money." Emily's voice cracked slightly. "I left that night, packed a bag, bought the oldest car I could find, and just drove." Jack's heart ached for her. The pain in her voice was raw and real, nothing like the sophisticated heiress he might have imagined before meeting her. "That must have been terribly lonely," he said quietly. Emily's eyes met his, filled with unexpected warmth. "It was, until that day at the grocery store." A small smile touched her lips. "You didn't see a wealthy woman or a poor woman. You just saw someone who needed help, and you helped. Do you know how rare that is?" Jack shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly very aware of the worn edges of his kitchen cabinets. the mismatched curtains his late wife had sewn years ago. "I just did what anyone would do," he mumbled. "But that's just it, they don't," Emily insisted. "I've spent years watching people calculate what they could get from me. But you." She reached across the table and touched his weathered hand briefly. "You gave when you had little to give. You showed kindness when you thought I had nothing to offer in return." The touch of her hand sent an unexpected warmth through Jack's chest, quickly followed by a wave of inadequacy. Here he was, a simple veteran with a small pension and a part-time mechanic's job, sitting across from a woman who could probably buy the whole town without blinking. "I've been testing humanity," Emily admitted, drawing her hand back. "Living like this, watching how people treat those they think are beneath them. Most walk right by. Some even seem to enjoy feeling superior." She paused, taking another sip of coffee. "But then there are people like you, Jack. You, and this wonderful little community you've built. The food pantry, the way you help veterans, how you treat everyone with such genuine respect. It's restored my faith in people." Jack stood up suddenly, needing to move. He walked to the sink, gripping its edge as he looked out at his small backyard. The morning glory vines his wife had planted years ago still climbed the old fence, their purple blooms facing the rising sun. "I don't know if I can be what you need in a friend, Emily," he said finally, his voice rough. "I'm just a simple man. I can't take you to fancy restaurants or buy you nice things." "Jack," Emily's voice was gentle but firm. "Turn around, please." He did, reluctantly meeting her gaze. "Those fancy restaurants? They're full of empty conversations and faker smiles. Those nice things? They're just golden handcuffs." Emily stood up, smoothing her simple sweater. "What I need in a friend is exactly what you've been, kind, honest, and real." Jack absorbed her words, wanting to believe them but still struggling with the vast gulf between their worlds. "The people in town," he said slowly. "They treat you differently now that they know who you are?" Emily's face fell slightly. "They don't know yet, just you and me." She stepped closer, her expression earnest. "And I'd like to keep it that way, if we could. Please?" The plea in her voice touched something deep in Jack's heart, pushing aside his own insecurities. Here was someone who needed help, not with car repairs or groceries this time, but with something far more precious, the chance to be seen for who she really was. "Of course," he said firmly, his military bearing showing in his straightened shoulders. "Your secret is safe with me, Emily, I promise." The relief in her smile made his earlier doubts seem foolish. Money didn't change who she was. The same gentle soul who prayed with struggling mothers at the food pantry and listened to his old war stories with genuine interest. If anything, knowing her truth only made her kindness more remarkable. "Thank you, Jack," she whispered. And he could hear in those 3 simple words the weight of trust she was placing in him. "You don't know what this means to me." Outside, a cardinal landed on the windowsill, its bright red feathers a splash of color against the morning light. They both watched it for a moment, sharing a comfortable silence that needed no words to fill it. A week had passed since Emily's revelation, and the rhythm of small-town life continued undisturbed. The early morning sun warmed the worn vinyl seats at May's Diner, where Jack and Emily had claimed their usual booth by the window. Steam rose from their coffee cups as they shared quiet laughter over plates of scrambled eggs and toast. "I never thought I'd enjoy sorting canned goods so much," Emily said, stirring cream into her coffee. Her eyes sparkled with genuine joy. Those kids at the food bank yesterday were something else. Jack's weathered face crinkled with a smile. "Tommy and his sister? They remind me of my own when they were little." He took a sip of his black coffee. "Speaking of which, Mary asked if you'd like to join us for Sunday dinner again." "I'd love that." Emily's face lit up. "Your daughter's pot roast is better than any 5-star restaurant I've been to." 3 booths behind them, Mrs. Callahan's ears perked up like a cat tracking a mouse. The widow adjusted her reading glasses and lowered her newspaper just enough to peer over the top. She'd been watching the pair for days. Something about the young woman nagging at her memory. "You know what I love most about helping at the shelter?" Emily continued, unaware of their audience. "Nobody expects anything from Emily Whitmore except kindness." Mrs. Callahan's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. Whitmore. The name clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. She'd just been reading about the Whitmore corporate empire in last month's Business Weekly. Their heiress had mysteriously disappeared from the social scene. Jack noticed Mrs. Callahan's sudden movement and felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced in combat when trouble was brewing. He watched the older woman's eyes narrow with recognition. "Did you see the new veterans coming to the shelter?" he asked, trying to keep Emily engaged in their conversation. But he could already see Mrs. Blank point from Laxt in U Planks Belast. Callahan sliding out of her booth, smartphone in hand. "They're making real progress," Emily said warmly. "Especially Richard. He opened up about his grandchildren yesterday." The click-clack of Mrs. Callahan's heels against the linoleum floor grew louder as she made her way to the counter where Betsy, the longtime waitress, was refilling coffee pots. Jack's jaw tightened as he caught fragments of their whispered conversation. "Can't believe it's her, billions of dollars, hiding right here in our town." Emily remained absorbed in their discussion about the shelter, her face animated as she described her ideas for new programs. Jack tried to focus on her words, but he couldn't help noticing how the diner's morning chatter had grown quieter, replaced by the subtle rustle of people leaning closer to catch Mrs. Indes. Callahan's stage whispers, "We should probably get going," Jack suggested gently, noting how heads were beginning to turn in their direction. "I promised to check on that loose board at the shelter before noon." Emily nodded, reaching for her worn canvas purse, the same one she'd been carrying when they first met. Jack couldn't help but marvel at how someone with such wealth could remain so genuine, so unmarked by privilege. As they stood to leave, Mrs. Callahan's voice carried clearly across the diner. "Just imagine, a billionaire's daughter right here in our little town." The effect was immediate. The usual clinking of cutlery and murmur of conversation died away. Every pair of eyes in the diner turned toward their booth. Jack pulled out his wallet to leave a tip, his movements deliberately calm despite the growing tension. Emily kept her eyes down, but her shoulders had stiffened. He could see the mask of privacy she'd carefully maintained beginning to crack. "Thank you for breakfast," Emily said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight of attention pressing in around them. They made their way to the door, past tables of people who had suddenly forgotten their cooling coffee and half-eaten meals. Jack placed a protective hand near Emily's elbow, not quite touching but ready to support if needed. The bell above the door chimed as they stepped out into the morning sunshine. Through the large front windows of the diner, dozens of faces watched their departure. Some wore expressions of shock, others of calculating interest. Mrs. Callahan stood by the counter, phone still in hand, looking triumphant. On the sidewalk outside, Emily took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. Jack noticed how the few people passing by on their morning errands slowed their pace, stealing glances at Emily with new interest. The peaceful bubble they'd maintained for the past week had burst, and the ripples were already spreading through their small community. The weight of those curious stares followed them down the sidewalk. Jack could feel them like a physical presence on his back, and he knew Emily felt them too. Her earlier relaxed demeanor had vanished, replaced by the practiced poise he now recognized from their first meeting, a shield she'd learned to wear in the spotlight. The simple joy of their morning coffee had transformed into something else entirely. As they walked toward Jack's truck, the whispers from the diner seemed to echo in the space between them, carrying Mrs. Callahan's words on the breeze. "Billionaire's daughter, hiding right here in our town." Mrs. Callahan's whispers spread through Main Street like wildfire. By noon, the sleepy town buzzed with speculation about the mysterious heiress in their midst. People who had barely glanced at Emily now studied her every move, their curious eyes following her as she walked down the street. Outside the hardware store, Emily noticed Mrs. Peterson, who had ignored her completely last week, now waving enthusiastically. "Emily, dear, what a lovely surprise. We're having a garden party this weekend. You simply must come." Emily forced a polite smile but felt her stomach twist. Just yesterday, Mrs. Peterson had hurried past her without a word. At the church food pantry, where Emily and Jack continued their volunteer work, the atmosphere had shifted. Ladies who once worked quietly alongside them now huddled in corners, whispering behind raised hands. Their eyes darted between Jack and Emily, their expressions a mix of judgment and speculation. "Did you hear?" one woman loudly whispered to another while sorting donations. "He fixed her car for free, probably trying to get his hands on her money." Jack pretended not to hear as he stacked boxes, but Emily saw his shoulders tense. The tips of his ears reddened, a telltale sign of his discomfort that she'd come to recognize. Later that afternoon, Emily watched from across the street as a regular customer drove past Jack's repair shop, slowing down before deliberately turning into his competitor's lot instead. It was the third customer that week to do so. When she visited Jack's shop that evening, she found him sitting at his desk, staring at a stack of canceled appointments. The usually busy garage was eerily quiet. "Tom Maxwell called," Jack said, his voice heavy. "Known him 15 years. Said he's taking his fleet of delivery trucks to Peterson's garage from now on. He ran a hand through his gray hair, didn't even give a reason." Emily's heart sank. "Jack, I'm so sorry. This is all my fault." "Don't," he said firmly, looking up at her. "You have nothing to apologize for." But the problems kept mounting. At the grocery store, Emily overheard two women in the produce section, their voices carrying deliberately. "It's shameful, really. A man his age, chasing after a young heiress, and him with 2 grown children. What kind of example is he setting?" The accusations stung. But what hurt more was watching Jack's reputation suffer. He'd spent decades building trust in this community, serving others without expecting anything in return. Now that trust was crumbling because of her presence. Even the veterans shelter, where Jack volunteered every Thursday, felt different. The easy camaraderie he'd shared with his fellow veterans had grown strained. Some of the men he'd served with for years now gave him cool nods instead of their usual warm greetings. One evening, Emily sat in her small rented apartment, watching the sunset through her window. The same window where she'd first felt hope about starting fresh in this town. Now that hope felt tainted. Her phone buzzed with messages from people who'd somehow gotten her number. Invitations to charity galas, requests for donations, business proposals. The final straw came when she spotted Jack's son, David, arguing with his father outside the repair shop. Their raised voices carried across the parking lot. "Everyone's talking, Dad. They're saying you're after her money. The whole town thinks you're some kind of gold digger." "Since when do you care what people think?" Jack's voice was tired but firm. "Since it's affecting your business? Since people are looking at us differently?" Emily couldn't bear to listen anymore. She drove to Jack's house that evening, her heart heavy with decision. He answered the door in his worn work shirt, comfort food cooking on the stove behind him, the same simple meal he'd first shared with her when she was just a stranger in need. "I think I should leave town," she said quietly, standing on his porch. "You have a life here, Jack. A good life. I'm destroying that." The words hung between them in the growing darkness, heavy with unspoken regret. The crickets chirped in the background, a reminder of the peaceful evenings they'd spent talking on this very porch before her secret changed everything. "All these people she continued, her voice catching. "They're turning against you because of me. Your business is suffering. Your relationships are strained. It's not fair to you." Jack listened in silence, his kind face lined with concern. The same face that had shown her such compassion when she was just a broken-down car and an empty stomach. The face that had never changed, even after learning who she really was. "You built something meaningful here," Emily said, gesturing to the town around them. "I won't be the reason it falls apart." The autumn sun was setting behind the church steeple as Emily stood in the empty parking lot, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The evening air held a sharp chill, but the coldness in her heart felt deeper. "I should go, Jack. I'm only causing trouble for you here." Jack shook his head firmly, his weathered face expressing the same quiet determination she'd seen that first day at the grocery store. "That's not the answer, Emily. Running away won't solve anything." "But your business," Emily's voice cracked. "I heard what happened at the shop today. 3 canceled appointments, all because of me." Jack leaned against his old pickup truck, his eyes kind but serious. "Those folks will come around. Truth has a way of outlasting gossip." Emily kicked at a small pebble, watching it skitter across the asphalt. "I've seen this before, Jack." The whispers, the fake smiles, the sudden friendships. "It always ends the same way." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "With people getting hurt. Maybe that's because you've always run before giving people a chance to see the real you." Jack's voice was gentle but firm. "The Emily I know doesn't quit on people who need her." "The food pantry can find another volunteer," Emily protested weakly. "Mrs. Martinez asked about you just this morning. Said her little boy Marco keeps asking when Miss Emily will read to him again." Jack watched as Emily's expression softened at the mention of the child. "And what about old Mr. Thompson? Who's going to help him sort his medication now?" Emily's eyes welled with tears. She'd been organizing the elderly veteran's pills into daily containers each week, knowing his arthritis made it difficult. Someone else could, Jack interrupted. But they're not you. You've made real connections here, Emily. Not because of your money, but because of your heart. A cool breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and Emily pulled her cardigan tighter. But the things they're saying about you, Jack, I can't bear it. They're calling you a fortune hunter, questioning your integrity, after everything you've done for this community. Jack actually chuckled, surprising Emily. Darlin', I've survived 3 tours in Afghanistan. I think I can handle a few small-town rumors. But no buts. Jack's voice took on the commanding tone Emily imagined he'd used as a sergeant. We're going to keep showing up. Keep serving. Keep doing what's right. The truth will speak for itself. Emily studied his face, finding nothing but steadfast conviction there. How can you be so sure? Faith, Jack answered simply. Faith in God. Faith in people's ability to see past their initial judgments. And faith in you. Something in Emily's chest loosened at his words. She'd spent so long protecting herself, building walls against disappointment and betrayal. But Jack's unwavering belief in goodness made those walls feel less necessary. Besides, Jack continued with a slight smile, what kind of example would we be setting for the folks at the Veterans Center if we let a little gossip chase us away? Emily couldn't help but smile back, thinking of the rehabilitation center they'd been discussing. It was Jack's dream, a place where veterans could find support, purpose, and community. You're right. Running away won't solve anything. So you'll stay? Jack's eyes held hers steadily. Emily took a deep breath, then nodded. I'll stay. But Jack, she met his gaze with worried eyes. What if it gets worse before it gets better? Then we'll face it together. Jack's voice carried absolute certainty. This town raised me, supported me through losing Sarah, helped me raise my kids. They're good people at heart. They just need time to remember that. Emily felt tears threatening again, but this time, they weren't entirely from sadness. Jack's faith in his community, despite their current behavior, touched something deep inside her. Okay, she whispered. We'll keep volunteering, keep serving, keep showing up. That's the spirit. Jack smiled warmly. Now, how about we start tomorrow? The food pantry needs restocking, and I hear there's a new shipment of children's books coming in. Emily managed a small laugh. You're not giving me much time to change my mind, are you? Not a chance. Jack's eyes twinkled. I'll pick you up at 9. I'll be ready. As they parted ways, Emily felt lighter than she had all day. The fear wasn't gone completely. She could still see it reflected in her eyes when she caught her reflection in Jack's truck window, but it was manageable now, tempered by Jack's steady presence and unwavering faith. Later that night, Jack knelt beside his bed, just as he had every night since he was a boy. The wooden floor was hard against his knees, but he barely noticed. His mind focused on prayer. Lord, he whispered into the quiet darkness, give me strength to do what's right. Help me protect Emily from those who'd hurt her, whether they mean to or not. He paused, his weathered hands clasped tightly. And Lord, help this town remember who they really are. Help them see Emily's heart, not her bank account. The silence of his modest bedroom wrapped around him like a familiar blanket as he continued his prayer, asking for guidance, wisdom, and the courage to stand firm in the face of judgment. Most of all, he prayed for Emily that she would find the peace and acceptance she so desperately sought. The morning light painted streaks of gold across the dashboard as Jack's old pickup truck rumbled down Main Street. Emily sat beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching the small shops and cafes come to life. The familiar smell of coffee and fresh bread wafted from Miller's Bakery as they passed. Thank you for coming with me today, Jack said, his voice gentle against the truck's steady hum. The guys at the shelter always appreciate new faces. Emily smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm happy to help. Besides, after everything you've done for me, it's the least I can do. Jack shook his head, his weathered hands steady on the wheel. You don't owe me anything, Emily. That's not how kindness works. The veteran shelter sat at the edge of town, a plain brick building with an American flag flying proud out front. Jack pulled into the gravel parking lot, the stones crunching under the truck's tires. A few men in worn jackets stood outside, smoking cigarettes and talking quietly. Inside, the shelter's main room buzzed with morning activity. Folding tables lined the walls, and the smell of breakfast filled the air. Jack led Emily to the kitchen, where volunteers bustled around with pots and pans. "Morning, Carter," called Tom, the shelter's cook. His white apron was already spotted with pancake batter. "Who's your friend?" "This is Emily," Jack said simply, without mentioning her last name. "She's here to help." Emily rolled up her sleeves and tied on an apron. For the next hour, she worked alongside Jack, serving plates of steaming pancakes and scrambled eggs. Her designer watch was hidden under rubber gloves as she washed dishes, and her genuine smile never wavered. The veterans, many with graying hair and tired eyes, responded to her warmth. She learned their names, listened to their stories, and treated each man with the same respect she'd show a CEO. After breakfast, Jack brought out several decks of cards. The main room transformed as tables filled with card games and conversation. Emily sat with a group playing poker, using matchsticks instead of money. "You're pretty good at this, miss," said George, an elderly veteran with thick glasses. "Where'd you learn to play?" "My father taught me," Emily answered, careful not to mention the luxury yacht where those lessons had taken place. "He always said it was about reading people more than reading cards." Jack watched from nearby as Emily laughed with the men, dealing cards with practiced ease. There was no trace of the wealthy heiress here, just a kind woman who chose to spend her morning bringing joy to others. During a break between games, Emily brought coffee to where Jack stood. "These men are amazing," she said softly. "Each one has such a story to tell." Jack nodded, accepting the steaming cup. "That's why I love volunteering here. Reminds me that every person has value, no matter what life's thrown at them." "I've noticed how you treat everyone," Emily said, her eyes meeting his. "Whether it's the mayor at church or a homeless veteran, you give them the same respect. It's rare to find that kind of genuine humanity." Jack felt his cheeks warm at her praise, but before he could respond, someone called for help with lunch preparation. They spent the next hours making sandwiches, sorting donated clothes, and talking with the shelter's residents. As the afternoon wound down, Emily noticed an elderly veteran named Frank struggling to get comfortable in a hard plastic chair. Without hesitation, she found a blanket in the supply closet and approached him. "May I?" she asked gently. Frank nodded, his roomy eyes grateful as she carefully draped the blanket around his shoulders, tucking it securely around him. Jack stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Something warm and unexpected stirred in his chest as he observed Emily's gentle care. The way she adjusted the blanket, her patient smile, the soft words she spoke to Frank, it all spoke of a genuine compassion that had nothing to do with her wealth or status. The late afternoon sun slanted through the shelter's windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Emily straightened up, catching Jack's eye. For a moment they shared a look of understanding, two people who had found something meaningful in serving others together. Jack quickly looked away, not ready to acknowledge the growing affection he felt. Instead, he busied himself with cleaning up the card tables, trying to ignore how natural it felt to have Emily working beside him, how right it seemed to share this part of his life with her. The shelter's director approached them as they prepared to leave. "You two make quite a team," she said warmly. "Will we see you again next week, Emily?" "I'd like that," Emily replied, looking to Jack for confirmation. He nodded, keys jingling in his hand. "Same time next week, then." As they walked to the truck, the evening air was cool and fresh. The American flag still waved overhead, its fabric snapping gently in the breeze. Jack opened Emily's door first, a habit from his military days, before walking around to the driver's side. Through the windshield, they could see Frank still sitting by the window, wrapped in the blanket Emily had given him. He lifted a hand in farewell as they pulled away, and Emily waved back, her smile genuine and warm. Jack kept his eyes on the road, but he couldn't help noticing how the setting sun caught the gold in Emily's hair, or how her presence made his old truck feel somehow fuller, warmer. He gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, pushing away thoughts he wasn't ready to face. The setting sun cast long shadows across the cracked parking lot as Jack's pickup truck pulled up to the abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. Emily noticed how his eyes lit up despite the building's worn appearance. The faded red brick, weathered windows, and rusty metal door couldn't dim the hope in his expression. "It's not much to look at right now," Jack said, fishing an old key from his pocket. "But I've always believed it could be something special." His weathered hands struggled briefly with the stubborn lock before it clicked open. Emily followed him inside, her footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. Dust motes danced in the rays of sunset, streaming through the grimy windows. The concrete floor showed years of wear, and exposed pipes crisscrossed the high ceiling. "I know it looks rough," Jack continued, his voice soft but passionate. "But I can see it so clearly. Right here, we could have therapy rooms." He gestured to one side of the building. "Over there, a common area where veterans could gather, play cards, support each other." His hand swept through the air, painting invisible walls and doorways. Emily watched him closely, noting how his usual reserved manner fell away as he shared his vision. "Tell me more," she encouraged gently. They walked deeper into the cavernous space, their footsteps stirring small clouds of dust. This back section, Jack pointed, could be private counseling offices. So many of our veterans struggle with PTSD, depression. They need a safe place to heal. He paused by a broken window, looking out at the overgrown lot behind the building. "Out there, we could plant a garden. Working with your hands, watching things grow, it helps quiet the mind." His voice grew softer. "I learned that myself after coming home." Emily touched his arm lightly. "How long have you had this dream, Jack?" He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. "Going on 15 years now. Started small, just wanting to help a few buddies who were struggling. Then I saw how many others needed support." His eyes clouded slightly. "The VA does what they can, but there's never enough resources. Some of these men and women, they just need someone who understands, you know?" They walked slowly through the space as Jack pointed out more details. Where a kitchen could go, space for physical therapy equipment, even a small library. Emily noticed how he had clearly thought through every aspect, probably spending countless hours imagining it all. "The building's owner is willing to sell," Jack admitted, his voice growing heavier. "But even at a decent price, it's way beyond what I could manage on my pension and part-time work." He tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still, doesn't hurt to dream, right?" Emily's heart ached at the resignation in his voice. She watched him run his hand along a wall, his touch gentle despite the rough surface. "Sometimes dreams find a way of coming true," she said softly. "Maybe." Jack shrugged, but she could see the longing in his expression. "For now, I do what I can. Drive folks to appointments. Lend an ear. Help where I'm needed." He gestured around the empty warehouse. "This place, though, we could help so many more. Give them real support, real hope." They walked back toward the entrance, Jack's boots scuffing against the concrete floor. "Sorry for rambling on," he said, suddenly self-conscious. "I don't usually talk about this much." "Don't apologize," Emily replied warmly. "It's a beautiful vision, Jack. The world needs more people who care like you do." He fumbled with the keys, locking the heavy door. "Well, that's enough dreaming for one evening. Can I drive you home?" "Actually, would you mind if I walked?" Emily asked. "It's such a lovely evening, and I could use some fresh air to think." Jack hesitated, his protective nature showing. "You sure? It's getting dark." "I'll be fine," she assured him with a smile. "It's not far, and this is hardly the big city." "All right then." He gave her a small wave as he climbed into his truck. "See you tomorrow at the shelter?" Emily nodded, watching as his pickup disappeared around the corner. Once she was alone, she turned back to face the warehouse. The last rays of sunlight painted the old brick in shades of gold and rose, and suddenly she could see it too, not as it was, but as it could be. A place of healing, of hope, of new beginnings. She placed her hand against the rough brick wall. "I promise you, Jack Carter," she whispered into the gathering dusk, "this dream won't stay just a dream much longer." The morning sun filtered through the dusty blinds of Mayor Collins's office as Jack shifted uncomfortably in the leather chair. The formal setting made him feel out of place in his work clothes, a plain blue shirt and khaki pants still carrying traces of motor oil from the morning's work at his shop. "Jack, I've got some extraordinary news," Mayor Collins said, practically bouncing in his seat. The usually composed politician could barely contain his excitement. "Someone has come forward with a substantial donation for the Veterans Rehabilitation Center you've been dreaming about." Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Sir, an anonymous benefactor has pledged enough money to fully renovate that old warehouse and run the center for at least 5 years." The mayor pulled out a thick folder and spread several documents across his desk. We're talking about state-of-the-art facilities, professional staff, everything needed to help our veterans get back on their feet. Jack sat frozen, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. The words seemed to float in the air, too magnificent to be real. I don't understand. Who would? The donor wishes to remain anonymous, Mayor Collins explained, straightening his tie. But they specifically requested that you be named project director. They want you to oversee everything, Jack. Your vision, your leadership. Tears welled up in Jack's eyes, and he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. Mayor, I'm just a mechanic. I don't know the first thing about running something like this. Nonsense. The mayor stood up and walked around his desk, placing a firm hand on Jack's shoulder. You've been serving veterans in this town for years. Nobody understands their needs better than you do. The donor made it clear. They trust your judgment completely. Jack stared at the blueprints spread across the desk. The plan showed everything he'd ever dreamed of. Therapy rooms, a gym for physical rehabilitation, comfortable living quarters, even a garden where veterans could find peace. His vision had somehow leaped from his heart onto paper. We'll provide all the support you need, Mayor Collins continued. Construction experts, medical professionals, administrative staff. But you'll be the heart of it all, Jack. This is your dream coming true. As Jack left the mayor's office an hour later, his head spinning with details and possibilities, he found a small crowd had gathered in the town hall lobby. News traveled fast in their small community. Mrs. Peterson from the church hugged him tight. Old Bill from the hardware store shook his hand vigorously. Even some of the customers who had recently avoided his shop were there, offering congratulations. It's a miracle, Mrs. Peterson said, dabbing her eyes. Those poor veterans will finally have a proper place to heal. Nobody deserves this more than you, Jack, Bill added, clapping him on the back. You've been helping folks around here for years without asking anything in return. Jack thanked them all quietly, still overwhelmed by the morning's events. His mind kept returning to one question. Who could have done this? The amount of money involved was staggering, far more than anyone in town could afford. He drove straight to Emily's apartment, his hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. She opened the door wearing a simple sundress, her face brightening at the sight of him. Jack, I wasn't expecting you until later. Is everything okay? He stepped inside, noticing how she watched him with those gentle eyes that always seemed to see straight through to his soul. Emily, something incredible has happened. They sat on her small couch as Jack shared the morning's news. Emily listened intently, her hands clasped in her lap, nodding at all the right moments. But Jack noticed something else. The way she bit her lower lip, how her eyes glistened with unshed tears. The center is going to happen, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Everything I've hoped for, everything those veterans need, it's all coming true. Some anonymous angel has made it possible. Emily reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. Jack, that's wonderful news. You deserve this so much. I keep thinking about all the lives this will change, he continued, his voice breaking slightly. Men and women who've given so much for their country, finally getting the help they need. A real chance to heal, to find their way back. A tear rolled down Emily's cheek as she smiled at him. Jack noticed how she seemed to glow with joy, though she remained quiet, letting him share his excitement. The mayor wants me to direct the whole thing, he added, shaking his head in disbelief. Me, a simple mechanic, I don't know if I can. You'll be perfect, Emily interrupted, her voice firm despite her tears. You understand what these veterans need better than anyone. You've lived it, Jack. You've been helping them all along, just on a smaller scale. Jack looked at her, suddenly struck by the fierce conviction in her voice. You really think I can do this? I know you can, she whispered, squeezing his hand again. You have such a beautiful heart, Jack. That's what these veterans need most. Someone who truly cares, who sees them as people, not just patients. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both wiping away tears. Jack felt the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. But it was a welcome weight, like a warm blanket on a cold night. Through his own tears, he noticed how Emily's smile seemed to hold a secret joy, as if she knew something he didn't. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, as Jack and Emily sat side by side on his weathered front porch swing. The gentle creaking of the chains matched their slow, peaceful rhythm. The evening air carried the sweet scent of Mary's flowering garden, where purple petunias nodded in the soft breeze. Jack's coffee mug warmed his hands, Though he'd barely taken a sip, his mind was too full of the day's events, the mayor's announcement, the mysterious donation, the dream that now seemed within reach. But most of all, his thoughts kept drifting to the woman beside him, her presence both comforting and unsettling. Emily wore a simple cotton dress, her honey blonde hair loose around her shoulders. Nothing about her appearance suggested the wealth she commanded, yet there was an undeniable grace in her movements, even in the way she held her own coffee mug. "I still can't believe it," Jack said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "That donation, it's going to change so many lives." He paused, swallowing hard. "Those veterans deserve a chance to heal, to find their way back." Emily smiled softly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "They do deserve it. And you deserve to see your dream come true, Jack." He turned to look at her profile, his heart heavy with something he needed to say. "Emily, The words stuck in his throat, but he forced them out. "I feel like I'm way out of my depth here. You're you, and I'm just a small-town mechanic with a veteran's pension." Emily's head snapped toward him, her blue eyes intense. "Don't do that, Jack. Don't diminish yourself." "It's not diminishing if it's true," he said, his voice rough. "You could have anything. Anyone. You probably have fancy businessmen and society folks lining up to court you back home." Emily set her mug down on the small table beside the swing, turning her body to face him fully. "Those fancy businessmen you're talking about? They see dollar signs when they look at me, not a person. But you." Her voice softened. "You saw someone who needed help, and didn't hesitate to give it, even when you thought I had nothing to offer in return." Jack's weathered hands tightened around his mug. "That's just basic human decency." "Is it?" Emily challenged gently. "Because I've spent years surrounded by people who wouldn't give a second glance to someone they thought was struggling. But you," she reached out, touching his arm. "You gave me groceries, fixed my car, invited me into your home. You showed me what real integrity looks like." The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through Jack's chest. He set his own mug down, afraid his trembling hands might betray him. "Money doesn't define worth, Jack," Emily continued, her voice passionate. "I've seen enough to know that integrity, kindness, and a genuine heart are worth more than any fortune. You have all of those things in spades." The swing creaked softly as Jack shifted, turning to face her. "You make it sound so simple." "Because it is," Emily insisted. Her hand slid down his arm, finding his rough, work-worn hand. Her fingers intertwined with his, soft against calloused. Jack's breath caught at the contact. Her hand felt so right in his, like it belonged there. The last rays of sunlight caught in her hair, creating a gentle halo effect that made his heart ache. "You're anything but just, Emily," he said softly. "You're the most remarkable person I've ever met." Their eyes met, and Jack felt something shift inside him. The worry about their different backgrounds, the fear of not being enough, it all seemed to fade against the reality of her presence, her hand in his, the understanding in her eyes. Emily's thumb traced small circles on his palm. "You know what I see when I look at you, Jack Carter? I see a man who served his country with honor, who raised 2 wonderful children alone, who gives and gives to his community without asking for anything in return. That's worth more than all the money in my family's accounts." Jack's free hand moved of its own accord, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The simple gesture felt monumental, like crossing an invisible line. His heart thundered in his chest as he realized with startling clarity that he was falling in love with her, not with her wealth or status, but with her gentle spirit, her kindness, her ability to see the best in others. Inside the house, Mary stood at the kitchen window, dishes forgotten in the sink as she watched her father and Emily on the porch. She noticed how they leaned toward each other, how their hands remained clasped, how her father's face held an expression she hadn't seen since before her mother died. It filled her with both hope and worry. Hope for her father's happiness, but worry about the complications their different worlds might bring. The last light of day painted everything in soft gold, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Jack and Emily sat in comfortable silence, their joined hands a bridge between their worlds, while Mary watched and wondered what tomorrow would bring. The late summer morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for the groundbreaking ceremony at the old warehouse. American flags fluttered along the chain-link fence, and rows of white folding chairs faced a small wooden platform. The mayor had insisted on making it a proper town event. Jack stood near the platform, tugging at his tie. He wasn't used to wearing one anymore, not since retiring from the service. His daughter Mary had helped him pick out a new Navy suit for the occasion, though he'd drawn the line at replacing his well-worn work boots. They were comfortable, and they felt right for breaking ground on a place meant to help working men and women who'd served their country. Emily sat in the front row, wearing a simple yellow sundress. She'd deliberately chosen something modest, not wanting to draw attention to herself. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and her eyes sparkled with quiet joy as she watched the townspeople filing in. Children ran between the chairs while their parents chatted, and several of Jack's regular volunteers from the veterans' shelter had shown up in their Sunday best. The mayor approached the microphone, tapping it twice. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats, we're about to begin." Jack's hands felt clammy as he climbed the 3 steps to the platform. From this height, he could see familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd. Mrs. Peterson from the church food pantry, old Bill who always needed his truck fixed, even some of the men who'd stopped coming to his shop when the rumors started. They were all here now, their expressions open and expectant. The mayor's introduction was mercifully brief. "And now I'd like to introduce the man who made this all possible through his tireless dedication to our veterans, Jack Carter." The applause was warm and genuine as Jack stepped up to the microphone. He pulled a wrinkled note card from his pocket, then thought better of it and tucked it away. Better to speak from the heart. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "You know, when I first came home from my last tour, I felt lost, like many of our veterans do. It was my late wife Sarah who helped me find my way back, who showed me that serving others was the best medicine for a troubled spirit." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the crowd. "This center isn't just about giving our veterans a place to heal. It's about giving them purpose, community, and hope. It's about showing them they're not forgotten." Jack's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Every person who walks through these doors will find acceptance, regardless of their rank or background. They'll find job training, counseling, and most importantly, they'll find people who understand what they've been through." In the front row, Emily dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Her pride in Jack shone clearly on her face, making his heart swell. "None of this would be possible without our anonymous donor," Jack acknowledged, careful not to look directly at Emily. "Their generosity proves that miracles still happen, that dreams can come true if we just keep faith." The crowd burst into applause again. Jack stepped back as the mayor returned to the microphone, announcing it was time for the ceremonial groundbreaking. 6 golden shovels gleamed in the morning sun, waiting to be used. Jack took his position beside the other dignitaries, the mayor, the Chamber of Commerce president, 2 city council members, and the local VA representative. At the count of 3, they pushed their shovels into the earth and turned over the first symbolic scoops of dirt. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment for the local paper. As the formal ceremony ended, tables of refreshments appeared, and someone started playing music through portable speakers. The mood shifted from solemn to celebratory. Children darted between adults, stealing cookies from the dessert table. Veterans gathered in small groups, sharing stories and hope for the new center. Jack found himself surrounded by well-wishers, accepting handshakes and backslaps from people who weeks ago had avoided his gaze. He handled it graciously, thanking each person who approached. Through it all, he kept catching glimpses of Emily circulating through the crowd, her yellow dress like a ray of sunshine. When the band struck up a slower tune, Jack finally managed to break away from the crowd. He made his way to where Emily stood chatting with Mary near the lemonade table. "May I have this dance?" he asked, extending his hand to Emily. Her smile lit up her whole face as she placed her hand in his. "I thought you'd never ask." They moved to a clear patch of grass, joining other couples who had started swaying to the music. Jack's work boots felt clumsy next to Emily's delicate sandals, but she didn't seem to mind. Her hand felt small and warm in his as they turned slowly. "Your speech was beautiful," Emily murmured, looking up at him with shining eyes. "I meant every word," Jack replied softly. "Especially the part about miracles." A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of Emily's perfume, mingled with the earthy smell of freshly turned soil. Around them, the party continued, Children laughing, old friends reconnecting, new friendships forming. But in that moment, as they danced together under the warm summer sun, Jack felt a flicker of pure happiness that made everything else fade away. Mary watched from the refreshment table, a knowing smile playing on her lips as she observed her father and Emily moving together in perfect harmony. The whole town seemed to glow with possibility and hope, much like the happy couple dancing in its midst. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the celebration as Luke Carter's old pickup truck rumbled into the parking lot. His weathered work boots kicked up dust as he slammed the door, his face etched with the familiar lines of disappointment. Another day of closed doors and sympathetic looks from potential employers had left him raw. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the townspeople mill about with paper plates loaded with potluck dishes. The sound of laughter and music drifted through the warm air, but it only seemed to deepen his scowl. His father, Jack, stood near the newly installed cornerstone, Emily at his side. They made quite a picture, his dad in his freshly pressed shirt, and Emily in her simple blue dress that probably cost more than Luke made in a month. "Did you hear?" A woman's voice caught his attention. "That Emily Whitmore donated the money anonymously. She's worth billions." Luke's hands clenched into fists. The whispers he'd been hearing around town suddenly crystallized into a harsh reality. He watched as Emily touched his father's arm, saw the way Jack's face lit up at her gesture. The sight made his stomach turn. "She's just playing with him," Luke muttered, drawing concerned looks from nearby guests. The punch bowl suddenly seemed very interesting to those standing near him. The band struck up a slow song, and Jack led Emily onto the makeshift dance floor. Luke couldn't take it anymore. The weeks of rejection letters, the mounting bills on his kitchen table, and now this, watching his proud father being made a fool of by some rich woman's game. He strode across the parking lot, his movements sharp with purpose. The crowd parted before him, sensing the storm in his expression. Jack spun Emily gently in a dance move, and she laughed, the sound like bells. Too perfect, too practiced. "Must be nice." Luke's voice cut through the music loud enough to make nearby dancers stop. "Playing charity case with my father." Emily froze mid-step, her face paling. Jack turned, recognition and concern flooding his features. "Luke, son, no, Dad." Luke's voice cracked with emotion. "You don't see what she's doing? Coming here, pretending to be poor, making everyone feel sorry for her?" His voice rose with each word, drawing more attention. Then suddenly, "Oh, look! She's actually a billionaire! How convenient!" The music scratched to a halt. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily took a small step forward, her hands trembling. "Luke, please. That's not what—" "Not what? Not what you intended?" Luke's laugh was bitter. "You rich people are all the same. You think you can buy anything, even my father's heart. Well, he's not some charity case for you to feel good about helping." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Callahan clutched her pearls, while Pastor Robert stepped forward as if to intervene, then thought better of it. "You've been manipulating him from day one," Luke continued, his voice raw with hurt and anger. "Pretending to be someone you're not, making him feel like some kind of hero for helping you. Was it fun? Getting our hopes up about this center? Throwing your money around like it means nothing?" Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "I never meant to—" She choked on the words, her composure cracking. "To what? To make fools of us? To play poor little rich girl in our small town?" Luke's words struck like physical blows. "People like us struggle every day while people like you treat our lives like some kind of game." Emily's face crumpled. A sob escaped her throat as she turned and fled, her blue dress disappearing into the gathering dusk. The crowd stood frozen, shocked by the ugly scene unfolding at what should have been a celebration. Jack's hand shot out, gripping Luke's arm with military strength. His face was a battlefield of emotions, anger warring with heartbreak, disappointment clashing with parental concern. The fingers around Luke's bicep tightened. But Jack's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "What have you done, son?" The parking lot lights flickered on, casting harsh shadows across their faces. Father and son stood locked in that moment, while around them, the celebration lay in ruins, much like the trust that had just been shattered. The fingers on Luke's arm trembled slightly, the only outward sign of the storm raging inside Jack Carter as he stared at his son, caught between his instinct to protect his child and his need to run after the woman who had just fled into the darkness. The night wrapped around Jack like a heavy blanket as he drove through the quiet streets of town. His hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Luke's angry words still echoed in his mind, each accusation cutting deeper than the last. The celebration that had started with such joy now felt like a distant memory. Jack pulled up to Emily's modest apartment building, noticing her car parked crookedly in its usual spot. A light glowed softly from her second-floor window. He climbed the stairs slowly, his boots heavy on each step, dreading what he might find. He knocked gently. "Emily? It's Jack." A muffled sound came from inside, followed by quiet footsteps. The door opened, revealing Emily's tear-stained face. Her usual grace was gone, replaced by a vulnerability that made his heart ache. She wore the same dress from the celebration, now wrinkled, her hair falling loose from its neat arrangement. "Oh, Emily," he whispered. She stepped back, letting him enter the small apartment. The space was sparse. She'd never fully unpacked, he realized. A few cardboard boxes still lined the walls, as if she'd always known she might need to leave quickly. "I'm so sorry about Luke," Jack said, watching as Emily sank onto her worn sofa. "He's been struggling, but that's no excuse for—" "Please don't apologize for him," Emily interrupted softly, wiping her eyes with trembling fingers. "He was only saying what everyone else has been thinking." "That's not true," Jack protested, but Emily shook her head. "Look what I've done to your life, Jack. Your customers are leaving. The town gossips about you. And now," fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, "now I've come between you and your son." Jack moved to sit beside her, but Emily stood abruptly, walking to the window. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. "I can't bear it," she whispered. "I can't bear bringing division to your family. You're such a good father, Jack. Your children need you, need your reputation intact. Emily, please listen to me." Jack's voice was rough with emotion. "Luke will come around. He's hurting right now, but he's a good kid. Once he sees who you really are." "But that's just it." Emily turned to face him, her expression anguished. "Who am I, really? The poor girl you helped at the grocery store? The heiress hiding from her responsibilities? I've been living a lie since I came here." "You've been living honestly," Jack corrected firmly. "More honestly than you ever could in your old life. I've seen your heart, Emily. That's what matters." Emily walked to her bedroom, and Jack's stomach clenched as she emerged with a small suitcase. She placed it on the coffee table, her movements deliberate despite her shaking hands. "What are you doing?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. "It's best if I leave," Emily said quietly, moving to the closet. She began taking clothes from hangers, folding each piece carefully. "Before I cause more damage, don't do this." Jack stood, his voice pleading. "We can work through this. Give Luke time." "Time won't change who I am, Jack," Emily's voice caught. "I'll always be the wealthy outsider who disrupted your peaceful life. Your son is right. I don't belong here." Jack watched helplessly as she continued packing, each item placed in the suitcase like another brick in the wall building between them. He thought of their time together, serving at the shelter, laughing over coffee, sharing quiet moments on his porch, all of it slipping away. "The Veterans Center," he said suddenly. "What about—" "It's taken care of," Emily assured him, zipping the suitcase closed. "The funding is secure. You'll do wonderful things there, Jack. You'll help so many people." She stood looking at him, her eyes full of unshed tears. Jack wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and tell her that none of this mattered. Not the money, not the gossip, not even his son's anger. But he saw the resolution in her stance, the way she'd already withdrawn into herself. "Please," he said simply. One last attempt. Emily moved to the door, suitcase in hand. She paused, turning back to look at him one final time. "Thank you, Jack Carter," she whispered, "for showing me that true kindness still exists in the world. I'll never forget that." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Jack standing alone in the empty apartment. The silence pressed in around him, heavy with all the words he hadn't said. Through the window, he could hear a car starting, then the sound of tires on gravel growing fainter and fainter, until there was nothing left but the hollow echo of loss. Jack sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands, feeling the weight of despair settle over him like a shadow. The apartment still held traces of Emily's presence. a forgotten scarf draped over a chair, the faint scent of her perfume, a coffee mug she'd left unwashed by the sink. Each detail was a reminder of what he'd lost, what the town's prejudice and his son's anger had driven away. In the darkness of the empty apartment, Jack Carter sat alone with his broken heart, knowing that sometimes love wasn't enough to bridge the gaps between worlds. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across Jack Carter's worn dining table. He sat there alone, his coffee growing cold, his weathered hands pressed against his temples. The house felt emptier than usual, the silence broken only by the gentle ticking of the old wall clock his late wife had loved so much. The wooden chair across from him scraped against the floor. Luke stood there, his face drawn and tired, looking much older than his 28 years. He'd clearly gotten as little sleep as his father. "Dad," Luke said softly, his voice rough. "I've been up all night thinking." Jack didn't raise his head, but his shoulders tensed slightly. The pain of yesterday's confrontation was still too fresh, too raw. Luke pulled out the chair and sat down heavily. "I was wrong," he admitted, staring at his hands on the table. "I was so wrong, Dad, and I don't know how to fix it." Finally, Jack looked up. His son's face showed the same kind of anguish he felt in his own heart. "You hurt her, son. You hurt her badly." "I know," Luke's voice cracked. "I was angry. Not at her, really. At everything. Every job rejection, every bill I can't pay, every time I have to ask Mary for help." He swallowed hard. "When I heard about Emily's money, something just broke inside me." Jack reached for his coffee cup, more for something to hold than to drink. "You judged her without knowing her, without seeing her heart. I thought." Luke paused, struggling to find the words. "I thought she was playing some kind of game. Rich people don't come to towns like ours, Dad. They don't shop at our stores or eat at our diners. They definitely don't fall for retired mechanics living on a pension. Son," Jack's voice was gentle but firm, "that's exactly the kind of thinking that drove her away from her old life. Money doesn't define a person's worth. You know better than that. I raised you better than that." Luke's eyes filled with tears. "I was trying to protect you. After Mom died, you were so broken. I couldn't bear to see you hurt again." He wiped roughly at his eyes. "But instead, I'm the one who hurt you." Jack reached across the table and gripped his son's arm. "Luke, Emily showed me more kindness and humility in these past weeks than most people do in a lifetime. She never once looked down on our town or our way of life. She worked beside me at the shelter, prayed with strangers at church, treated everyone with respect." "The Veterans Center," Luke said suddenly. "That was her, wasn't it? The anonymous donor?" Jack nodded slowly. "She knew how much it meant to me. But she didn't want recognition or praise. She just wanted to help." "God, I'm such an idiot." Luke pushed back from the table, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I ruined everything. She'll never come back now. The whole town probably thinks we're terrible people." "The town's opinion isn't what matters here," Jack said firmly. "What matters is that you let your own insecurities and prejudices blind you to someone's true character." Luke slumped back in his chair. "I know. When I saw you two together at the celebration, you looked happy. Really happy. For the first time since Mom died." His voice grew quiet. "And instead of being grateful that you'd found that again, I got scared. Scared you wouldn't need me anymore. Scared things would change. Change isn't always bad, son." Jack's voice was tired but understanding. "Emily brought light back into my life, yes, but that doesn't mean I love you or your sister any less. I want to apologize to her," Luke said earnestly. "But she's gone, isn't she? And it's my fault." Jack stood up slowly, his joints protesting the movement. "I need to think. Need to pray about what to do next." He grabbed his truck keys from the counter. Sometimes the hardest part of being a father is watching your children learn from their mistakes. Luke remained at the table, looking lost and small, like he had as a little boy after breaking a neighbor's window with his baseball. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." Jack paused at the door, his hand on the knob. "I know you are, son, but I'm not the one who needs to hear that apology." The drive to the church was quiet. The streets still mostly empty in the early morning hours. Jack parked his truck in the familiar spot, noting how the morning dew made the old building's stained glass windows glisten. Inside, the sanctuary was cool and peaceful, Smelling of wood polish and old hymnals, Jack slid into his usual pew, the one where he'd sat with his wife for 25 years, where he'd recently started sitting with Emily. Bowing his head, he closed his eyes, letting the weight of everything settle around him like a heavy cloak. "Lord," he whispered into the silence, "I need your guidance. My son's heart is hurting. Emily's heart is broken. And mine." He paused, swallowing hard. "Mine feels lost without her. Show me the way forward. Show me how to make this right." The morning light streamed through the colored glass, painting patterns on the wooden floor. Jack stayed there, head bowed, letting the quiet peace of the church wash over him as he prayed for wisdom. The afternoon sun streamed through the broken windows of the old warehouse, casting angular shadows across the partially renovated space. Jack Carter's footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as he walked through what would soon become the Veterans Rehabilitation Center. Construction materials lay scattered about, stacks of drywall, bundles of copper pipes, and sheets of plywood waiting to be installed. He paused near a half-finished wall, running his calloused hand along the fresh wooden frame. This was where the counseling room would be. He could still hear Emily's soft voice from when he'd first shown her the space. "Jack, imagine how many lives will change in this very room." The memory hit him like a physical ache. Emily had seen his vision so clearly, had believed in it, in him, without hesitation. Now the warehouse felt hollow without her presence, like a church without its congregation. Moving deeper into the building, Jack reached the large open area that would become the community space. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams while the smell of fresh lumber filled the air. Here, Emily had spun around with her arms wide open, her eyes shining as she described how veterans could gather for meals and companionship. "We could put a piano right there," she had said, pointing to a corner. "Music can be so healing." Her genuine excitement had warmed his heart that day, making him forget about the vast difference in their backgrounds. Jack settled onto a stack of lumber, his shoulders heavy with regret. He pulled out the building plans from his back pocket, unfolding them carefully. Emily's neat handwriting filled the margins with suggestions. Small, thoughtful details she'd noticed during their visits. "Remember cushioned chairs for those with back injuries?" one note read. "Maybe a coffee station here?" The papers trembled slightly in his hands. How had he let her walk away? He'd spent so many years being the steady, reliable one, the man who never rocked the boat, who accepted life's hardships with quiet dignity. But that approach had cost him dearly this time. Standing up, Jack walked to one of the broken windows. Outside, the town square bustled with afternoon activity. He could see Mrs. Henderson watering the flowers in front of her shop, Tom Miller sweeping his storefront, kids riding their bikes along the sidewalk. This town had been his whole world for so long, its opinions mattering more than perhaps they should have. The sound of hammering from the far end of the warehouse drew his attention. 2 workers were installing support beams, their movements precise and purposeful. They were building something lasting, something strong. The parallel wasn't lost on Jack. He thought about Emily's words on his porch that night. "Your integrity is worth more than money." She'd seen him. Really seen him. Not as the modest small-town mechanic or the struggling widower, but as a man of value. And what had he done? He'd let his own insecurities and the town's whispers overshadow what they'd built together. Jack's hand closed around the silver cross he wore on a chain, a habit from his military days. He remembered the courage it had taken to lead his unit through dangerous territories, to make decisions that could mean life or death. Why had he shown less courage in matters of the heart? Moving to the center of the warehouse, Jack stood where the main entrance would be. Emily's anonymous gift had made all this possible, but it wasn't about the money. It was about her belief that everyone deserved a second chance, her understanding that healing came through community and purpose. She'd matched his dream with her resources, never seeking credit or praise. The late afternoon light shifted, creating long shadows across the floor. Jack watched as they stretched toward him like fingers pointing the way. He thought about all the times he'd counseled younger veterans about facing their fears, about not letting past wounds dictate their futures. It was time to take his own advice. His footsteps became more determined as he walked through the space one more time. Each area held memories of shared dreams and quiet conversations with Emily. The corner where they'd planned the medical office, the space marked out for the training room, the future kitchen where they'd imagined serving holiday meals to veterans who had nowhere else to go. Jack's jaw tightened with resolve. He'd faced gunfire without flinching, endured the loss of his wife with quiet strength, raised 2 children on a modest income. But he'd never fought for love. Not like this. The time for standing quietly in the background, for letting others' judgments guide his actions, was over. He pulled out his phone, looking at Emily's number on the screen. No, this wasn't something for a phone call or a text. This needed to be public as the whispers and stares had been. The town needed to see that love wasn't about social status or bank accounts. It was about 2 hearts recognizing what was true and valuable in each other. Jack walked to the warehouse entrance, his steps echoing with purpose. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. He stood in the doorway, squaring his shoulders like he used to before leading his unit into uncertain territory. The familiar weight of determination settled over him, as comfortable as his old military uniform. The evening air hummed with anticipation as people filtered into the community center's main hall. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the walls, and round tables dressed in crisp white cloths filled the space. A hand-painted banner stretched across the stage. Veterans Hope Center fundraiser. Emily Whitmore slipped in through the side entrance, her designer clothes exchanged for a simple blue dress. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the small pearl necklace at her throat. Her mother's, the one piece of her wealthy life she couldn't bear to leave behind. She chose a seat in the shadows of the back corner, watching as familiar faces filled the room. Mrs. Henderson from the church food pantry bustled past, carrying a tray of home-baked cookies. Old Mr. Peterson, one of the veterans Jack had helped so often, shuffled to a front table with his daughter supporting his arm. Even Mrs. Callahan, the town gossip, was there, her gray head bobbing as she whispered to her companions. Emily's chest tightened as she spotted Mary, Jack's daughter, helping to arrange flowers on the tables. The girl's face showed signs of stress, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. Next to her stood Luke, Jack's son, his shoulders hunched with what looked like the weight of regret. The hall slowly filled with the low murmur of conversation and the scraping of chairs. Emily noticed how people clustered together, some throwing furtive glances her way before quickly looking elsewhere. A few seemed surprised to see her there, but most were too caught up in their own conversations to notice the quiet woman in the back. Pastor Roberts took the stage first, tapping the microphone. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice warm and steady. "We're here tonight to support a dream, a center that will give our veterans the help and hope they deserve." Emily's fingers twisted in her lap as the pastor continued. Her suitcase waited in her car outside, packed for tomorrow's early departure. She hadn't planned to come tonight, but something had drawn her here, perhaps the need to see Jack one last time, to carry the memory of his kindness with her. The kitchen doors swung open, and volunteers emerged with trays of food. The scent of pot roast and fresh bread filled the air, reminding Emily of that first simple meal in Jack's home. How long ago that seemed now, though it had been only weeks. She watched as people filled their plates, their laughter and chatter, a stark contrast to the hollow feeling in her chest. A small commotion near the stage drew her attention. Jack had entered through the side door wearing his best suit, the one she knew he saved for special occasions. The navy fabric was slightly worn at the elbows, but he carried himself with dignity. His silver hair was neatly combed, his face showing the quiet determination she had come to know so well. Several veterans approached him, shaking his hand, clapping him on the shoulder. Jack smiled and spoke with each one, but Emily could see the strain around his eyes, the way his gaze kept scanning the room. Once, his eyes passed over her corner, but the shadows kept her hidden. Mary approached her father, straightening his tie with gentle hands. Emily saw Jack lean down as his daughter whispered something in his ear. He nodded, squeezing Mary's shoulder before making his way toward the stage steps. Luke appeared then, intercepting his father. Emily couldn't hear their exchange, but she saw Jack place a firm hand on his son's arm. Luke's face crumpled slightly, and he pulled his father into a quick, fierce hug. When they separated, both men's eyes were bright with unshed tears. The room gradually quieted as Jack mounted the steps to the stage. Pastor Roberts handed him the microphone, stepping back with an encouraging nod. Jack stood there for a moment, one hand resting on the podium, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Emily's heart thundered in her chest. This would be her last glimpse of him, the man who had shown her what real kindness looked like, who had valued her for herself and not her fortune. She memorized everything. The way he stood, straight and proud despite his years. The gentle strength in his weathered hands. The silver at his temples catching the light. The microphone squeaked slightly as Jack adjusted it, and Emily found herself holding her breath. She watched as he squared his shoulders, his eyes sweeping across the gathered crowd one final time before he began to speak. The light from the stage caught the small medals pinned to his lapel, quiet testimonies to his years of service. His fingers brushed them briefly, almost unconsciously, as he took a deep breath. The room fell completely silent, every eye fixed on the man who had become the heart of their community's newest mission. In that moment of perfect stillness, Jack's steady voice filled the hall. Jack Carter stood at the microphone, his weathered hand steady on the podium despite his racing heart. The harsh spotlight made him squint, but he could still make out the sea of familiar faces, neighbors, fellow veterans, friends who'd known him for decades. His voice, when it finally came, carried the same quiet strength that had guided his unit through war zones. "Folks, I've never been one for fancy speeches," he began, managing a slight smile. 25 years in the military taught me to speak plain and true. Tonight, I need to do just that. He paused, scanning the crowd until he spotted Emily in the back, half hidden in shadow. Their eyes met briefly before she looked down at her hands. "When I took my military oath, I swore to defend what's right, to live with honor. That oath didn't end when I hung up my uniform." Jack's voice grew stronger. "These past few months, I've watched this town, my home, judge someone I care about based on nothing but the size of her bank account." A rustle of whispers swept through the room. Jack pressed on, his spine straight as a rail. "Emily Whitmore came to our town looking for something money can't buy, genuine human kindness. She could have stayed in her mansion, surrounded by people who only wanted her wealth. Instead, she chose to live simply, to serve others, to prove that a person's worth isn't measured by their wallet." He gestured toward the veterans seated near the front. "She sat with you fellows, played cards, listened to your stories, never once mentioned her name or her fortune. She just gave her time, her heart." Jack's voice softened as he spoke directly to Emily, though she remained in shadow. "I watched you comfort mothers at the food pantry, wrap blankets around homeless vets, pray with strangers who needed hope. That's who you are, Emily. Not some wealthy heiress, just a woman with a servant's heart." The room had grown completely still. Even the usual clink of coffee cups had ceased. "When I showed you my dream for this veterans center, you didn't see a poor man's impossible fantasy. You saw possibility. You believed in it, in me, when nobody else did." Jack's voice caught slightly. "I know now you were the anonymous donor, and I know why you kept it quiet. You wanted the focus to stay on the veterans, not on yourself." Emily's shoulders trembled visibly now, tears tracking down her cheeks. "Some folks accused me of being a fortune hunter." Jack squared his shoulders. "Well, I am hunting for something valuable, but it's not money. It's the kind of love that serves without recognition, gives without expecting return, and sees the best in people even when they're at their worst." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Emily Whitmore. Not your bank account or your family name. I love your gentle spirit, your generous heart, and your quiet strength. I love how you treat every person, rich or poor, with the same dignity. I love that you'd rather serve in a soup kitchen than sit in a boardroom." The silence in the room was absolute. Jack's voice grew tender. "I may not have millions to offer you, but I promise to love you with everything I am, to stand beside you, protect you, and thank God every day for bringing you into my life." Emily's hands covered her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Several women nearby dabbed at their eyes with napkins. "If anyone here still thinks I'm after her money," Jack's voice took on an edge of steel, "then you never really knew me at all. 25 years serving this country taught me that honor, integrity, and true love are worth more than all the gold in Fort Knox." The sound of a chair scraping back broke the silence. Luke Carter stood, his face etched with shame. He walked slowly to the center of the room, turning to face Emily. "Ms. Whitmore," his voice cracked. "Emily, I owe you the biggest apology of my life." Luke's hands clenched at his sides. "I was bitter, angry about my own failures. Instead of seeing the wonderful person you are, I let jealousy poison my heart. I accused you of things that couldn't be further from the truth." Tears streamed openly down Luke's face now. You've been nothing but kind to my family. You helped make my father's dream come true, and I repaid you with suspicion and cruel words. I'm so deeply sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me." The entire room held its breath, watching as Emily slowly raised her tear-stained face to look at Luke. Her expression held no anger, only compassion. Jack stood at the podium, watching his son's moment of redemption, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. The love and pride on his face spoke volumes about the man who had raised his children to admit their mistakes and seek forgiveness. The veterans in the front row, men who knew the true meaning of honor and courage, nodded in approval. They recognized the strength it took to acknowledge wrongs publicly and seek to make them right. The silence stretched, heavy with emotion, and the weight of words spoken from the heart. In that moment, wealth and status meant nothing. All that mattered was the truth of love, the power of forgiveness, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The crowd fell silent as Emily rose from her seat in the back row. Her hands trembled as she smoothed her simple blue dress, the same one she'd worn when Jack first met her at the grocery store. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she took her first hesitant steps forward. The townspeople parted like a wave, creating a path toward the stage where Jack stood. Some faces showed shame, others hope, and a few sparkled with tears. Mrs. Callahan, who had first spread the gossip about Emily's identity, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Emily's heart pounded with each step. The distance seemed endless, yet she couldn't look away from Jack's steady gaze. He remained at the podium, his military bearing evident in his straight spine and squared shoulders, but his eyes held nothing but tenderness. Luke stepped forward from the crowd, his face etched with remorse. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I was wrong. So wrong. I let my own failures and fears poison everything. I saw your wealth as a threat, when all you've done is help people, help my father." He swallowed hard. "Can you ever forgive me?" Emily stopped in front of Luke, seeing the same strength of character in him that she admired in his father. "Of course I forgive you," she said softly, touching his arm. "You were protecting your father. I understand that kind of love." Luke's shoulders sagged with relief, and he stepped back, nodding to his father. Emily turned toward the stage, where Jack was now descending the steps. The microphone caught his boots on each wooden stair, the sound echoing through the silent hall. They met in the middle of the room, where the afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, casting a warm glow around them. Jack took both her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet room. "When I first saw you outside that grocery store, I thought I was helping someone in need. But you were the one who helped me. Helped all of us." He gestured to the gathered townspeople. "You showed us what real wealth looks like. It's not in bank accounts or fancy clothes. It's in how we treat each other." Emily's vision blurred with tears as Jack continued. "I don't want you to stay as our benefactor or because of what you can give to this town. I want you to stay. Because," his voice caught for a moment, "because I love you. Just you." The woman who serves soup at the shelter, who prays with strangers, who sees the best in everyone, even when they don't deserve it. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. "Jack," she whispered, squeezing his hands. "All my life, people have seen my family's name first. But you saw me. Just me." She took a shaky breath. "When I was pretending to be poor, you treated me with dignity. When you learned I was wealthy, you treated me exactly the same. That's when I knew I was falling in love with you." Jack's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay here, where people know the real you now. Stay with me." Emily's answer came in a whisper that somehow filled the entire room. "Yes." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Mary Carter rushed forward to hug them both, and Luke wrapped his arms around all three. The sound of clapping hands and joyful voices echoed off the walls of the old hall. Jack pulled Emily close, one arm around her waist. She leaned into his embrace, feeling truly at home for the first time in years. His steady heartbeat against her cheek spoke of security, of acceptance, of love that asked nothing in return. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold. the wooden floors, the faces of their friends and neighbors, the future stretching out before them. In that moment, wrapped in Jack's arms with the sound of celebration all around them, Emily knew she'd finally found what all her family's wealth could never buy, a place where she belonged exactly as she was. The morning sun painted golden streaks across Main Street as Emily walked hand in hand with Jack toward the Veterans Center. Construction workers tipped their hard hats, greeting them with genuine smiles instead of the suspicious glances from weeks before. The rumble of machinery and sharp taps of hammers filled the air with the sounds of progress. "Morning, Miss Emily. Mr. Carter," called Tom Wilson, a local carpenter who had initially been among the skeptics. He climbed down from his ladder, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Those windows you suggested for the meditation room, they're perfect. The light comes in just right." Emily beamed, squeezing Jack's hand. It was Jack's idea, really. He knows exactly what his fellow veterans need. Inside the building, Luke Carter stood examining blueprints spread across a makeshift table. When he saw them enter, he straightened up, his face softening with a warmth that had been absent during their first encounters. "Dad, Emily, you're just in time. I've been thinking about the layout for the physical therapy wing." Luke's voice carried an eagerness that made Emily's heart swell. "If we move these walls, we can fit more equipment without making it feel cramped." Jack stepped forward to study the plans, and Emily watched the father and son bend their heads together, pointing and discussing. The sight brought tears to her eyes. Happy ones this time, so different from the tears she'd shed after Luke's bitter accusations at the town celebration. Mary burst through the door carrying a basket of still warm muffins. "Breakfast for the working crew," she announced. "Emily, I used that recipe you shared, the one from your grandmother. They smell wonderful," Emily said, accepting the warm hug Mary offered. These casual touches of affection had become natural between them, replacing the awkward distance that once existed. Throughout the morning, townspeople dropped by with donations, furniture, medical supplies, books for the library corner. Mrs. Akarpel Henderson, who ran the quilting circle, arrived with a stack of handmade blankets. "For the veterans who'll be staying here," she explained, patting Emily's arm. "We want them to feel at home." Emily helped arrange the blankets in the dormitory wing, remembering how, just weeks ago, these same women had whispered behind their hands about her wealth. Now they included her in their conversations about grandchildren and garden tips, treating her like any other neighbor. During lunch break, everyone gathered in what would become the community dining room. Construction workers sat shoulder to shoulder with volunteers, sharing sandwiches and stories. Luke pulled up a chair beside Emily, offering her half of his cookie. "I was wrong about you," he said quietly, his eyes on his father across the room. "I was so caught up in my own struggles, I couldn't see what was right in front of me." Emily touched his arm gently. "You were protecting your father, I understand that." "He's happier than I've seen him since Mom died," Luke admitted. "And it's not because of your money, it's because of you, who you are inside." In the afternoon, Emily worked alongside Mary in the garden they were planting behind the building. They dug their hands into the rich soil, placing seedlings that would grow into vegetables for the center's kitchen. "You know," Mary said, pressing earth around a tomato plant, "I always wanted a sister. Now it feels like I have one." Emily had to pause in her work, overwhelmed by emotion. "I always wanted a family who saw me for who I am, not what I own." As the day wound down, Pastor Roberts stopped by to discuss the weekly support group meetings he would lead. The same man who had first noticed Emily's refined manners now treated her with the easy familiarity of a longtime parishioner. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," he remarked, watching volunteers carry in boxes of donated Bibles. "Sometimes it takes a stranger to help us see the best in ourselves." Jack wrapped an arm around Emily's shoulders as they stood in the doorway, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Workers and volunteers were heading home, calling out goodbyes and see you tomorrows. "Look at what we've built together," he said softly. Emily leaned into his solid warmth. "Not just the building," she replied. "Look at what's grown in people's hearts." They watched Luke help Mrs. Thompson unload one last box of supplies from her car, while Mary chatted with the construction crew about tomorrow's schedule. The evening air carried the sounds of laughter and friendly conversation, sounds of a community united in purpose and understanding. Where there had once been whispers and sideways glances, there were now open smiles and warm greetings. The town's initial judgment of their unlikely romance had transformed into a celebration of love's ability to bridge any gap. Their story had become a reminder that true worth lay not in bank accounts or social status, but in the genuine connections between hearts. The rehabilitation center stood as a physical symbol of this transformation, a place where broken things would be made whole, where judgment would be replaced by healing, and where every person would be valued for their true self. Just as the town had learned to see beyond Emily's wealth to her heart, they had discovered their own capacity for growth and acceptance. As twilight settled over the street, the last workers headed home, leaving Jack and Emily standing in the peaceful quiet of their dream taking shape. The building that had once been an abandoned warehouse now hummed with the promise of new beginnings, not just for the veterans it would serve, but for an entire community that had learned to open their hearts to unexpected love. The autumn breeze carried the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings as crowds gathered in front of the newly completed Veterans Rehabilitation Center. What had once been an abandoned warehouse now stood proudly transformed, its red brick facade gleaming, windows sparkling in the morning light. A wide red ribbon stretched across the main entrance, fluttering gently in the wind. Jack Carter stood near the podium, tugging at his tie. He wasn't used to wearing one, but Emily had helped him pick it out navy blue, with subtle stripes. His weathered hands smoothed down his best suit jacket, the same one he'd worn to church for the past decade. Despite his nervousness, his eyes shone with pride as he looked at the building before him. Emily stood beside him, radiant in a simple blue dress. Her hand found his, squeezing gently. "You did this," she whispered. "We did this," Jack corrected, his voice rough with emotion. "All of us." The parking lot had been transformed into rows of white chairs, now filled with veterans, their families, and townspeople. Luke sat in the front row, his expression peaceful, so different from the angry young man who had caused such pain months ago. Next to him, Mary beamed, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Mayor Thompson approached the podium, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here today to celebrate not just the opening of a building, but the birth of hope in our community." The crowd settled into respectful silence as the mayor continued. "This center represents the very best of what our town can be. A place where service is honored, where healing is possible, and where second chances become reality." Jack's gaze swept across the faces before him. There was Mrs. Callahan, who had once spread gossip about Emily, but now brought home-baked cookies to the center's kitchen every Wednesday. Behind her sat Tom Miller, the hardware store owner who'd given them a generous discount on supplies. Even gruff old Mr. Peterson, who'd initially opposed the construction, sat with his Vietnam veteran's son, both men's eyes glistening. "I'd like to invite Jack Carter and Emily Whitmore to come forward," the mayor announced. They walked hand in hand to the podium. Jack cleared his throat, unfolding a worn piece of paper from his pocket. Emily's neat handwriting had helped him organize his thoughts, but as he looked at the crowd, he set the paper aside. His heart knew what to say. "When I returned from war," Jack began, his voice steady, "I carried wounds that weren't visible. Many of us did. Some days the weight felt too heavy to bear." He paused, meeting the understanding nods of fellow veterans. "But this town, you people, you helped me find my way back. Now it's our turn to help others find their way." Emily stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "This center isn't about charity or handouts. It's about honor, respect, and the belief that every person deserves a chance to rebuild their life." She smiled at Jack. "Sometimes the biggest miracles start with the smallest acts of kindness." Several veterans came forward to share their stories. Robert Jensen, leaning on his cane, spoke of how Jack had helped him through his darkest days. Sarah Martinez, a young veteran who'd already benefited from the center's early programs, described how it had given her hope again. The most moving moment came when Luke stood up unexpectedly. He walked to the podium, his steps uncertain but determined. "I almost ruined something beautiful because I was blind with bitterness," he admitted. "But my father taught me that true strength isn't in pushing people away, it's in opening your heart to others." He turned to Emily. "Thank you for showing us what generosity really means." Mrs. Peterson, the choir director, led the town in singing "God Bless America," voices rising strong and clear in the morning air. Veterans stood at attention, some saluting, others wiping away tears. Jack and Emily moved to the ribbon, where golden scissors waited. The mayor handed them over with a flourish. "Would you do the honors?" They gripped the handles together, their fingers intertwined. The crowd counted down. 3, 2, 1. The ribbon parted with a satisfying snip. Cheers erupted, echoing off the building's walls. Veterans and townspeople alike surged forward, hugging and congratulating each other. The doors swung open, revealing the warm, welcoming interior they'd all worked so hard to create. Above the entrance, a bronze plaque gleamed in the sunlight. It read, "The Carter Whitmore Veterans Center, where hope, healing, and second chances begin." Mary ran up to hug her father and Emily, tears streaming down her face. Luke joined them, forming a family circle that had grown stronger through adversity. Around them, the community celebrated not just the opening of a building, but the triumph of love over prejudice, of hope over despair, of unity over division. The autumn breeze carried the sound of laughter and joy across the parking lot, through the open doors, and into the heart of a dream finally realized. Veterans began exploring their new sanctuary, while families and townspeople followed, eager to see the spaces they'd helped create. Jack and Emily stood in the doorway, watching their vision come to life. The therapy rooms, the counseling offices, the community gathering spaces, each area represented countless hours of planning, work, and prayer. But more than that, they represented the power of two hearts joining together to serve others. The morning sun streamed through the windows, warming the polished floors and fresh-painted walls. As the crowd moved through the building, their footsteps and voices filled the spaces with the first echoes of healing, hope, and new beginnings. Emily looked at Jack, her eyes bright with tears of joy. He didn't need to say anything. His proud smile said it all. Together, they had built something larger than themselves, something that would touch lives for generations to come. The ceremony continued as the community explored their new center. But the ribbon cutting had marked the official moment, the moment when dreams became reality, when wounds began to heal, and when a town discovered that love truly could transform everything it touched. The warmth from the center's grand opening celebration still lingered as Jack's modest kitchen filled with the aroma of Mary's home cooking. Through the window, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting a gentle glow across the dining room table where Jack, Emily, Mary, and Luke gathered for an intimate family dinner. Mary had outdone herself with a feast of comfort, food pot roast, mashed potatoes, and fresh rolls that reminded Jack of his late wife's cooking. The table was set with their best dishes, the ones usually reserved for holidays and special occasions. Tonight felt worthy of them. Emily sat beside Jack, her presence both elegant and humble in their simple surroundings. She wore a plain blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking more at home here than she ever had in the glossy magazine photos Luke had once scrutinized with suspicion. Luke shifted in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The tension in his shoulders was visible as he cleared his throat. "Emily," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I apologized at the ceremony, but I need to say it again properly. I was wrong about you, so wrong. I let my own problems and pride cloud my judgment." Emily reached across the table and covered Luke's hand with her own. "Luke, you were protecting your father. I understand that kind of love." "No," Luke shook his head firmly. "I wasn't protecting him. I was angry at my own failures, and I took it out on you. The way you've loved Dad, how you've helped so many veterans through the center. You're everything this family needed." Mary dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, and Jack squeezed Emily's other hand under the table. The simple gesture spoke volumes about how far they'd come. "You know," Mary said, passing the basket of rolls, "I think Mom would have loved you, Emily. She always said Dad needed someone who could see his heart, not just his circumstances." Jack's chest tightened at the mention of his late wife, but for the first time, the pain was tempered by gratitude. "Sarah had a way of knowing what we'd need, even years down the road," he said softly. Emily smiled, her eyes glistening. "I wish I could have met her. She raised two amazing children. To Mom," Luke raised his water glass, "and to new beginnings." They all raised their glasses, the simple toast carrying the weight of healing and hope. Jack looked around the table, at his son's renewed spirit, his daughter's joy, and the remarkable woman who had changed their lives by simply being herself. Mary served the pot roast, and conversation flowed easily. Luke shared stories about his new job at the Veterans Center, where he'd found purpose working with the younger veterans. His face lit up as he described helping a former Marine repair motorcycles in the center's workshop. "Dad," Luke chuckled, "remember when you used to let me help you fix cars? I must have stripped more bolts than I tightened." Jack laughed, the sound rich and full. "You may have cost me some hardware, but watching you learn was worth every penny." "Speaking of learning," Emily added, "I saw you teaching that young veteran's daughter to change oil yesterday. You're a natural teacher, Luke." Luke's cheeks reddened at the praise. "Well, someone once taught me that passing on knowledge is as important as having it." Mary brought out her apple pie for dessert, and the sweet scent of cinnamon filled the kitchen. As she served the warm slices, Emily shared stories about her own family traditions, speaking openly about her past for the first time. "We had formal dinners every Sunday," she recalled. "Everything was perfect and perfectly cold. This," she gestured to their simple table, "this is what I always wanted. Real family, real love." "Well," Mary said firmly, "you've got it now. Whether you like it or not, you're stuck with us, Carters." They joined hands around the table, and Jack led them in prayer. His deep voice carried years of gratitude as he thanked God for second chances, for healing, and for bringing Emily into their lives. After the plates were cleared and the kitchen cleaned, Emily insisting on helping despite Mary's protests, the evening settled into a peaceful rhythm. Luke and Mary sat in the living room, looking through old photo albums, their laughter drifting through the house. Jack turned to Emily, extending his hand. "Would you like to get some fresh air?" She nodded, slipping her hand into his. They stepped out onto the back porch, where the night air carried the crisp edge of autumn. Above them, stars sparkled in a velvet sky, far brighter here than they ever shone in the city Emily had left behind. Their fingers intertwined as they walked slowly across the backyard. The grass was soft beneath their feet, and crickets chirped their evening symphony. Neither felt the need to break the comfortable silence, content in the simple act of being together. Jack remembered countless nights like this, standing alone and looking up at these same stars, wondering if he'd ever feel complete again. Now, with Emily's hand in his, he knew the answer. Sometimes the greatest gifts came disguised as broken-down cars in grocery store parking lots. The Sunday evening air held a gentle warmth as people streamed into the courtyard of the newly opened Veterans Rehabilitation Center. Folding chairs spread across the brick patio in neat rows, while others sat on blankets spread over the freshly planted grass. The setting sun cast long shadows through the young maple trees that lined the space, their leaves dancing in the soft breeze. Jack Carter stood near the entrance, greeting people with firm handshakes and warm smiles. His weathered face showed more joy than it had in years. He wore his Sunday best, a crisp blue shirt and khakis pressed just that morning. Every few moments, his eyes drifted to Emily, who was helping some of the older veterans find comfortable seats near the front. She moved with natural grace, her simple floral dress swaying as she guided an elderly man with a cane to his chair. Her genuine smile lit up her entire face as she chatted with each person she helped. No one would guess she was worth billions. She was simply Emily, the kind woman who loved their town and its people. Mary and Luke Carter worked together, setting up a small refreshment table with lemonade and cookies. The siblings had grown closer through recent events, their shared love for their father bringing healing to old wounds. Luke caught Emily's eye and gave her a warm wave, his earlier bitterness completely transformed into brotherly affection. The pastor from the local church stood near a small portable keyboard, shuffling through worn hymnals and organizing sheet music. Children darted between the chairs, their laughter mixing with the pleasant murmur of conversation. Several veterans from the shelter sat together, their faces relaxed and peaceful in ways Jack hadn't seen before. As the sun dipped lower, casting orange and pink streaks across the sky, the pastor called everyone to attention. Jack made his way through the crowd to where Emily stood. She slipped her hand into his as naturally as breathing, and they found seats together in the middle row. "Amazing grace," the pastor announced, and the first notes from the keyboard floated through the evening air. Voices rose together, some wavering and others strong, but all sincere. Emily's clear soprano blended perfectly with Jack's deeper tones as they sang about grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. A young girl nearby clutched a small American flag, waving it gently as she sang. Her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran Jack had helped recently, held her other hand, tears glistening in his eyes. The sight made Jack's throat tight with emotion. As one song flowed into another, the community's voices grew stronger, They sang How Great Thou Art and It Is Well With My Soul. Each hymn seemed to knit their hearts closer together. Mrs. Callahan, who had first spread the gossip about Emily's identity, now sat nearby, her face softened with genuine friendship as she shared her hymnal with a young mother. During Be Thou My Vision, Emily leaned close to Jack's ear. "I finally feel at home," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Really, truly home." Jack's heart swelled as he looked at her. Gone was the lost woman he'd met in the grocery store parking lot, replaced by someone who glowed with belonging and purpose. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, overwhelmed with gratitude for second chances, for both of them. The music continued as the sky deepened to purple. Someone had strung soft white lights through the trees, and they twinkled like earthbound stars. Veterans who had arrived alone now sat shoulder to shoulder with townspeople, sharing stories between songs. Children had settled onto blankets, some dozing in their parents' laps, while others still hummed along. A cool breeze carried the scent of fresh-cut grass and late summer flowers. The renovation had transformed the old warehouse and its grounds into something beautiful. But the real transformation was in the people gathered there. Where there had been division, now there was unity. Where there had been judgment, now there was acceptance. Where there had been loneliness, now there was family. The pastor led them in one final song, "Let There Be Peace on Earth." The melody rose into the darkening sky, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of everyone present. Jack looked around at the faces illuminated by the gentle lights, his children, his neighbors, his fellow veterans, and Emily, the woman who had changed everything by simply being herself. The crowd filled the courtyard completely now. Hundreds of people joined together in song and spirit. Some stood with arms linked, others held hands or embraced family members. The sight captured everything Jack had dreamed of when he'd first imagined this center, a place of healing, hope, and community. As the last notes faded into the evening air, a peaceful silence fell over the gathering. In that moment, Jack knew with absolute certainty that love could overcome any barrier, faith could move any mountain, and redemption was possible for anyone who opened their heart to it. Emily squeezed his hand, and when he looked at her, he saw the same knowledge shining in her eyes. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Carter, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.